Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show. This is Tony, coming to you from New Zealand. On with me today I have John Heller, and he will be pretty familiar to most of you because I have him on the A Minute to Midnight show fairly regularly, and there's always loads to talk about. So welcome, John.
Good to be back, Tony. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on, and there is certainly no shortage of things to talk about with the virus and the very things, everything that's going on, and with the economy. And I noticed this morning I was looking in the stock market's gone up big time again, and the first thing came to my mind was I remember Evelyn de Rothschild, who probably one of the most powerful men in the world behind the scenes, saying in a comment some years ago that the stock market is not a real reflection of a country's economy. And I would say that's definitely the way it's looking at the moment. You get a little bit of good news, supposedly, like Apple going to be reopening their stores with people having to wear masks and have their temperatures taken. And if you had have thought that was good news a couple of months ago, I doubt it. But now it's and free money, of course, and all the prop up stimulus, and so we have a stock market up today, but that's not a real reflection of the economy of America, is it?
No, it's not really. Nothing fits together right now. There's good news and bad news everywhere you look. Look, most people are still employed right now, although in the United States, unemployment rate is officially around 15%, but it's probably twice that amount when you consider all the people that back in the 2008-2009 recession, they made it more difficult for people to file for unemployment benefits. So now we have about 36 million people over the last 5 or 6 weeks that have filed for unemployment benefits in the United States that have successfully filed. And there's thinking that number could be 50% to 100% higher for the people that can't check all the little boxes now that they have to check to get unemployment benefits.
Well, I know somebody that fits that category that applied for the unemployment benefit in America and has been turned down, even though they've got no income. So that's crazy.
Well, so there's somebody. And I don't know that person would appear in the statistics. That I think the ones that they count are the ones that have successfully filed for unemployment. In any event, the number is huge. So in light of that, though, we see the stock market going up and down a little bit. I think it was up. What I'm seeing is about 4% today. This is to be expected because it's a stock market. I think your quote there from one of the Rothschilds was correct, that it's not an accurate reflection of what's going on in the economy. There are very strange anomalies. For example, we've been considering selling our house, and in our neighborhood, house prices are up almost 20% in the last 6 weeks. And I know this sounds weird, that the economy is declining, and I've talked to a number of different realtors as to what explains that. And they just said people still need to move. They have jobs. Columbus, Ohio seems to be a pretty good market. And right now, certain areas of Columbus are just like exploding in value in terms of like things that you usually would only see in California. So it's a little bit unusual around here, but the inventory of available homes is so low. So where I live, I'm a mile from the headquarters of the largest company in Ohio. So that probably skews the value a bit, that, somebody who's going to work there would want a house close. Particularly in this day and age, you don't want to be taking the bus and that type of thing. That's at least to another one. Somebody commented on our YouTube video, the prophecy update that I did yesterday, that, well, I work in the used car business and used car prices are up. So I don't really think the economy is all that bad, but I don't think that that's a very, and not to denigrate this person's opinion, but I don't think it's a very deep analysis, because in many parts of the country, public transportation has been shut down. People will still need to go to work. People will still need to get around. For example, in the New York City subway, the Washington Metro, subway system, transportation system, ridership is down 90 to 98%. Well, those, unless people are staying at home, they need a car. So I would think that there would actually be more demand in the used car market than there normally would be, and therefore the prices would be higher. So I don't think you can take a look at just one particular segment of the economy. But if you remember, Tony, we did a show, I think it was back late January of this year, almost 4 months ago. And I remember we specifically talked about the shutdown that was occurring in China at that time, that oil and gas demand was down 40, 50% in China in just a couple of weeks. And that people should prepare because there was a ripple effect. There was an economic, in addition to a virus, a health contagion, there was also economic contagion that was going to start rippling through the economy. And that was the China shutdown. And China was effectively shut down for about 75 days. You cannot shut down the world's major production power in terms of consumer goods and all that sort of thing and not have it affect everybody. So I don't know if I can get this pulled up. I will try to pull up while we're talking, but New York Times has done some very good analysis, I think. And I know you can always say, "Oh, it's the New York Times. You should never trust anything that the New York Times says." But the New York Times did a series of charts. They have in the subscription part of their website, they have a thing called what do they call that thing? Here, let me share my screen here. They have a section called Upshot, NewYorkTimes.com/Upshot. And so a lot of times it's a lot of charts and graphs. And so for sort of a semi-geeky person like myself, I'm always fascinated by this. And so what they did was, for example, here's a chart from the state of Georgia showing the economic impact of what happened with the change in economic measures and lockdown. And so as you can see the economy going along back in early February, sort of the baseline, and how things, time spent at work and consumer spending and that sort of thing. And you see a decline in March, but the lockdowns, the stay-at-home orders never really became effective in Georgia until early April. And I could show you chart after chart like this for different types of lockdowns, severe lockdowns, moderate lockdowns, and no lockdown at all. I even had one, I think I used in my prophecy update yesterday, from Sweden. And the Swedish chart showed that looks very much like Georgia, even though they did not shut down. And so what you see, though, is you see essentially a decline in economic activity starting back in March, but the lockdown orders didn't come for several weeks after that. And so the result of that is that I think the theory, or at least what we talked about back in January, was that this economic thing that was happening in China was going to cause a worldwide decline. And I think these charts kind of bear that out.
Yeah, they do. Yes. Yep. And it's interesting. I'll just show you. There's an article Michael Snyder put out yesterday. 10 numbers that show the US has fallen into horrifying economic depression, and he's got a whole bunch of things here. But basically, this is a telling one. It says more than 100,000 US businesses have already permanently shut down during this pandemic, and that represents millions of jobs that are never coming back. And there's a whole bunch of other things that he's got in there. Those are pretty significant things,
Well, I think, Michael does a pretty good job of covering those things. And I can just tell you, as someone who works with banks in my legal practice, things are pretty slow right now, but there's going to be a flurry of litigation and activity. There's going to be litigation over insurance policy coverages, whether the shutdown orders or the virus would trigger business interruption insurance. The insurance companies are pretty much taking a hard line right now that in order to have a claim for business interruption insurance, you need to have property damage. So the question is a virus floating around out there somewhere, maybe not in your building, but that leads to a government lockdown order, and you have to close your business, is that technically business interruption as it's defined in the policy? And I could tell you there's going to be years and years of litigation. This thing will not resolve itself very quickly. I also know that in talking to some of my contacts that do business liquidations when businesses go bad, and I'll come in and file a foreclosure. We'll get a receiver appointed over the property and estate of the business, and then we'll liquidate the assets. I just did an auto parts store a couple months ago before everything started to fall apart. But in talking to one of my receiver contacts that does this, he said, some things he would still do. He would do he might do a medical practice because medical equipment is still going to have some value. But he's also been approached about liquidating some restaurants or a chain of restaurants. And he said, I wouldn't touch restaurants with a 10-foot pole because they'll never be able to sell enough of the assets of the restaurant to pay my fee, let alone make any money for the bank or lender. He said, these big commercial gas ranges in a restaurant kitchen that go for about $5,000, you'll be able to pick up for $80, he thinks, in the very near future once everything starts to open back up. So that stuff is not going to resolve itself quickly. Retail has been devastated in many respects. I think that probably was the problems there were exacerbated by the shutdown. But my view, Tony, is that everybody was running around saying that this was the greatest economy in the last 90 years since the Great Depression, or at any time in the last 70, 80, 90 years. But my view was that it was a bubble. It was built largely on debt. All the fundamentals that were wrong back in 2008 and 2009 were not dealt with after the 2008 and 9 recession. They were made worse. So you had massive corporate debt in the United States totaling somewhere over $10 trillion. You have student loan debt approaching $2 trillion, much of which is in default, very high percentage. You have consumer debt, you have mortgage debt, and then, of course, you have government debt. And, we were complaining during the Obama administration of $21 trillion national debt. As of today, I think it's at $26 trillion. And the way the Fed is pumping money into this market, or they're just buying everything in sight, it seems like, to try to prop things up. Between that and the stimulus packages, U.S. debt will soon be $30 trillion, if not $35 to $40 trillion. And so everything that was wrong in 2008 and 2009 is just magnified, and it's on steroids now. It's an incredible thing to watch. So it was very dangerous politically. I was thinking as I saw various politicians taking credit for the great economy, because I viewed it as a bubble. And I will confess, I pulled my money out of the market a while back because I figured a crash like this was coming, just because I could see how the banks were reacting to different things through my representation of them. I could kind of see how the financial markets were going. Now, I missed it by a mile. I missed it by years, but I know people that have lost 60% of their retirement savings in 10 days during this debacle. Now, they've made a little bit of it back as the market has rebounded a bit, but the ripple effects of what we've seen economically are going to go on for some time. The concern I have, I think the concern that you and Michael Snyder and other people have, is that the old rubric that certain people always say is never let a crisis go to waste. And they're certainly going to follow that principle now and put into place whatever agendas they have to the extent that they can. So I do think that this is a time is ripe for the globalist and that type of thing to step in and do what they want to do, because it's it's pretty bad out there. I do go out almost every day. I'm working a little. I'm, sort of on the brink of retirement anyway. My life is actually pretty good. The golf course is open. And until recently, the food was pretty available in the grocery stores. And it depends where you shop. Things seem to be doing okay here if you have the money. The local Costco meat counter, steaks that were going for $7.99 a pound last week. All beef and pork disappeared from Costco for a day, and then it came back, and now the price for those same steaks is $12.99 a pound. So that's not good for people that don't have a job or have the money.
Yeah. The other thing too, I'm thinking of here that's been going on is the move by Australia asking for an independent inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus. They haven't specifically mentioned China, but we got here this coalition of 62 countries backs joint Australia EU push for independent inquiry into the coronavirus outbreak. That was an ABC net, but 2 days ago. I think that number is maybe something like 116 countries now calling for an inquiry. And of course, China is not happy about that. So you start to wonder, are we hearing war drums going in the background here? Because as well, with the sort of China versus the rest almost.
Well, there was an interesting article, I referenced it yesterday, from the Times of London. And in that article, it talked about the fact that, and I think it was picked up by some of the other British press and that sort of thing, that the U.S. had conducted war games in the Pacific, simulating a war game between the U.S. and China. And the result of that was that the U.S. lost under almost every scenario. So I think, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Nyquist, but
yep.
Jeff has been blogging on this for a long time, and other people like Gordon Chang at the Center for Security Policy, or securefreedom.org, Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney's group. They've been talking about China's planning for war against the United States. So it's you can make a very credible case that whatever happened with the virus, whether it was intentional or not, China then made steps to take advantage of it, and it's had a pretty good effect. If this was a bioweapon, they got a lot of bang for their buck, because they effectively shut down the economies all over the world, just about.
And it's still going on, and this is the whole thing. The global economy is still tanking. I think we're only in the early stages of it's going to get much worse yet. And so the angst for a lot of people towards China over, their handling of this, and also the WHO, who didn't declare a pandemic until well late, and was saying they weren't happy about people closing their borders and so on, and yet we look at it now, and how many countries would have liked to have closed their borders faster had there been a warning of this supposed pandemic, or plandemic, as many people have labelled it. It does leave you wondering. You threatened to basically ruin Australia's economy over Australia calling for an inquiry. I noticed they were not happy with New Zealand. Winston Peters, Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, recently said something about including Taiwan in to do with measures for the pandemic and listening to them. And of course, China wasn't happy about it all, because they don't see Taiwan as a country; they see it as part of China. And so they were not happy with New Zealand. I noticed the next day, one of our banks, it's probably may have nothing to do with it, but my first thought when this bank was down all day on the internet and everything, you couldn't access their internet for a best part of a day, was I wondered if it was a Chinese cyber attack against the bank, and it may not have been, but that was my first thought. It was just very coincidental that one of our major banks was down for best part of a day straight after that.
Yeah, YouTube was down for a while the other day as well because people started contacting me. Hey, I tried to get to your channel, and I tried to go to this channel and this church and that church and this, and it seemed to be, of course, it's probably the sample I'm drawing from is people who would be looking at church channels and prophecy videos and that type of thing. So that my data set is probably skewed that way. But, I was like freaking out there for a minute because I couldn't access anything. And then I did remember there's a great little website called Down Detector that you can go to. And there were massive YouTube outages all over the world. So maybe they were hit with a cyber attack as well.
You do wonder when these things happen like that. So, yeah.
Well, it's I think the thing that this whole pandemic, epidemic, plandemic, whatever you want to call it, has shown, at least from a Bible prophecy standpoint, is how quickly things changed. I mean, things changed literally overnight, everywhere, all around the world. And then you were faced with all these different sorts of things, like you had Resurrection Sunday with no church meetings anywhere. Yeah. So everything changed immediately overnight everywhere, and things that we've never seen really happen. And I guess one of the advantages, a lot of these globalist type events, like the Pope had a big thing that was supposed to take place on May 14th at the Vatican. He was not able to do that because of the coronavirus. So it shut down bad things, but it's also shut down a lot of good things. And it happened all at once. The world changed. Air travel is down by most estimates 90%.
Yeah, I saw something yesterday. I think only 5% of domestic flights in the US are normal for the same time last year. I think it's only 5% or something, which is pretty crazy.
I was traveling a lot around 9/11 when that happened. And when 9/11 happened, of course, I was on a plane, 3 or 4 days a week, traveling coast to coast, many weeks, 3 or 4 weeks out of the month, 3 out of 4 weeks in a month. And so I remember I flew 13 days after 9/11 the first time, and there was me and 2 other guys on the 737 flying to the East Coast from Columbus, Ohio. And that continued for, close to a year. Now I'm seeing things that travel's not going to come back until next year. And it's never going to get back to the level that it was at. I mean, everybody was flying. Everybody was flying everywhere. And then all of a sudden it's all shut down. And it's not going to come back for 5 years, they're saying. I saw today a report that Disney World, Disneyland is probably in the U.S. is not going to reopen probably this year. At least that's what they think right now. And that has a ripple effect. That affects the food supply. So, Disney World in Florida gets over 1 million visitors a week on average. Well, they all have to eat a couple meals a day. They have the hotels and all this other stuff. And so everywhere you look, there's just this massive disruption, Tony. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. Big article in the Wall Street Journal today about college towns. All the colleges are shut down. So cities like Blacksburg, Virginia, where Virginia Tech is located, or Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is located. A lot of those economies are 60% of the local economy in those areas is tied to the university. And so they don't have the football games. They don't have commencement exercises. They don't have people visiting. And everything is just shut down. And so there's going to be I don't know what to say. I wish I was a prophet. I talk about prophecy, but I wish I was a prophet so I knew exactly what was going to happen. But this is just something like we've never. this is something like we've never seen before.
Totally, yeah. It is. It's still. I'm still uncertain of the actual coronavirus itself, just how bad the thing is, or has it been completely overblown? And there's been a lot of deaths that have been attributed to it that have been other things. This article here is a couple of weeks old, and it was Swiss, from Swiss Policy Research, May 6th. And they've gone through an overview of a whole lot of stuff, and a lot of people will disagree with it, no doubt. But it says, according to the data from the best studied countries and regions, the lethality of COVID-19 is on average about 0.2%, which is in the range of a severe influenza flu and about 20 times lower than originally assumed by the WHO. And there's a whole lot of stuff. It's worth reading this article as to why they're saying that. And the thing is that a lot of people, deaths by coronavirus, someone might have had the coronavirus, but it might not have been that killed them. Various things, people getting a heart attack and dying because they didn't go to hospital. There's all of these things. I know in New Zealand we've had 1,500, I think, approximately 1,500 coronavirus cases. The only people that have died, 21 of them, all been old people with underlying medical conditions, and most of them were in 2 rest homes. So the average New Zealander that's got it hasn't died. Yes, some of them have got quite sick. A friend of mine was telling me some people that he knows in London, he's known 2 that have had it in London. One of them died. The other one was sick for 4 weeks. But again, both of them, the one that died was sort of older, and the one with the 4 weeks was already had underlying conditions, basically, wasn't that healthy. So, you got to go, has this really been the best approach? New Zealand locked down very quickly, so our numbers of coronavirus cases every day are down to 0 or 1 now. We've got no new ones, basically. So some people here are lauding it as the greatest thing, that they've done that. Whereas Sweden, of course, they haven't locked down anything. And in the end, what is the best approach? I don't know. But in New Zealand, well, we rely on tourism. It's been our huge thing. Now we've got no tourism. So people's businesses are gone. People are struggling, many people. So what's going to happen in the end was locking down the best thing or the worst thing that New Zealand could have done. I don't know. Because they're not talking about, like you were saying about air travel, it's like saying that our borders are going to be closed for a long time to come. Well, that means that's the end of tourism. They want to open them between New Zealand and Australia at some time first, but even that could be a way off. So how do countries survive this economically? Or maybe they aren't supposed to survive it. Perhaps that's the plan.
So, the question is whether it was planned or not. And I'm sort of agnostic on the subject a little bit. Certainly, there's no doubt that people have taken advantage of it. So politically here in the United States, the political left, the unions, the Democrats, and everybody else, every politician that has an agenda or a pet project has been shoving this into the stimulus bills. And there's no discipline that's being exercised at all physically at the level of our federal government. At the same time, the state governments are really the ones that are putting in the lockdown orders in the United States. Here in our locally, the government, the Ohio state government here, they're trying to cut $700 million or $800 million from the budget because as people don't drive, there's no gas taxes that are paid, and the gas taxes fund the road repairs, and the road repairs, those are where people have jobs, and it's just this ripple effect. And then you add, a small thing. It's not as huge a part of the economy as everybody thinks, but sports. There's no sports taking place anywhere. I was kind of kidding with a friend of mine. I said, what are they talking about on ESPN these days? Because there's just nothing going on. And it's really unlike anything I've ever seen. I went into a restaurant early on when everything was starting to be shut down, and it was a brew pub. they have bar food and that type of thing. So I was picking up some burgers, and all the chairs were up around the bar, and around all the seating was turned over on top of the table. But all the big screen, they must have 15 big screen TVs in there. They were all turned to a sports channel where nothing was happening. And I thought, this is weird. This is really strange. So we also know that, I don't know if I mentioned it on a show with you, and I know you've talked to some other people about it, but the World Economic Forum has at weforum.org, they have a section of their website called Strategic Intelligence. And you can sign up for a free account. They'll probably track you, but they're probably already tracking you anyway. But they have this incredibly well-organized website. It's clear that it's done with artificial intelligence and all these links. And as you drill down into this website, it's just, to me, it's almost shocking. But it's like, how did they have this whole thing ready to populate? They have a whole section devoted to COVID-19, and it has global governance and all these different things. And how did they get all of that in place so quickly if they weren't planning it?
And the other thing is the way it's shaped. The layout looks like a coronavirus, basically, the circular layout of the whole thing. It's like, yeah, that's suspicious as well, I think.
It's incredible. So if you really want to know what the globalists and that type of thing are planning, they've certainly laid everything out there in plain sight. I think the big thing from Bible prophecy's standpoint, though, is everybody's concerned about the vaccine, and is this going to be the mark of the beast? I personally don't think it's the mark of the beast. I think it's setting things up for the mark of the beast. And there's a lot of opinions out there. I think there's people pronouncing that this vaccine is the mark of the beast. I think that's a little bit too far to go right at the present time. I think it's certainly something to watch out for. But as I'm sort of reading through some of the scientific literature and that type of thing, I don't know that they're ever going to have a vaccine for this thing. They've never really had an effective vaccine for something like this. I don't think they're going to get it done that quickly. And so if they do get something done that quickly, I think most people are going to apply common sense and say, I don't want anything to do with that because I'm not sure that's safe.
At least they mandate that you have it, which is I covered that the other day in a video with.
I saw that.
Yeah, this is the thing. But you're right. There's never been a successful vaccine for anything like a coronavirus, and yet we have them speaking as if they've got one coming this year. Trump's and his team saying that. We've had others, and I saw a image. I'll put it up on the screen. I think Bill Gates, just how many outfits he has pumped money into. The WHO, just everywhere, the CDC. It's like Bill Gates is at the center of funding for so many things, and we know that he's a big pusher and advocate for vaccines and pushing a vaccine developing a vaccine for this. It's very suspicious. Why is this man who has no medical background the king of world health?
Well, it certainly seems to be self-appointed, and I'm sure you saw the video of Melinda Gates on NBC a week ago with what appears to be an upside-down cross.
Yeah, I don't know whether I didn't really have a close examination of that. I know some people say it was shopped later and that it wasn't really an upside-down cross, but it was made to look like that.
Yeah, I pulled the original video down and I showed it to my wife, so I'll blame it on her. She said, I said, what's that look like to you? She goes, my goodness. She goes, that's an upside down cross. That's pretty obvious and blatant. So whether it is or not, certainly Gates is involved in this, but even Fauci last week, I'm not sure I believe much of what he says, but he was saying he didn't know if we were going to have a vaccine for a while. And I think he even said, I think this was in a CNBC interview, that even if we get a vaccine, it may not only not be effective, it may actually cause one of these sort of immune system storms that really is deadly to a patient because it overstimulates the immune system and the immune system response. So even he says that, there's a major problem with these. I think Gates, I think I read he's funding, or he said they're funding like 7, 8, 9 plants that would be used to manufacture a virus, depending on what the virus, the vaccine is manufactured. There's different techniques, and you can't just set up a plant to do that overnight. So they've selected sort of like 9 methods that they would have to use to manufacture it. And I guess he's funding these plants. I don't know. I'm sort of not believing that there's really going to be a vaccine, and so I don't know what's going to happen. But certainly, as things have not panned out to be as dangerous or as bad as some people said, except in some places, there's some weird things that have happened. I think the lockdown orders are going to be, lifted, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. There are some strange things though, like New York and some other places have had a huge spike in deaths, and I'm talking like anywhere from 75% above the normal seasonal average to 300 or 400% above the normal average. And the bodies are stacking up in places, not everywhere, but so there's. And I don't even know. I don't even believe that all those are COVID related. I think a lot of those are just here. I don't know what you did in New Zealand, but here in the United States, they essentially shut down the healthcare system.
Same here, yeah.
And so people who would get a knee replacement or a hip replacement or cancer treatments, or maybe just regular care for a chronic condition, have been sort of shut out of the system, or they've had so much fear instilled with them that they won't go to the doctor at all. So they've had, this is over a month ago, New York was noticing that they would usually have 20 in-home deaths a day in New York City metro area. And all of a sudden they were having 250 a day, every day. So they're up like 10 times the number of daily in-home deaths. And they can't all be COVID related. And they're scratching their head like, what is going on? So, whatever the intentions were in all the lockdowns, there certainly is a huge ripple effect in the economic impact of a lot of these things. Again, I think starting with the China shutdown, but exacerbated by the lockdowns, has rippled through, and it's just causing all sorts. There's mental health problems. There's domestic abuse is way up in a lot of places in the United States. And I think it's a situation where there are people that are, it's not safe for women to be at home that much with, their husbands or vice versa when there's, domestic problems. So it's like a storm of all this stuff. And when we look at it in relation to Bible prophecy, I've often used the example of the Indian Ocean tsunami back in, I think it was Boxing Day 2004 or 2005, somewhere in that range.
It was 2004, I think, yeah.
2004. And, I had this video that I use sometimes when I'm teaching, and the people are there, and the water drains out of the bay at this resort. And the boats are sitting on this bottom, and you can walk out and you can see the coral. And everybody's like, well, this is really interesting. Isn't this cool? And nobody realizes that total destruction is coming very soon. So here we sit in a world where 2 months ago, there were wars and rumors of wars, and there were earthquakes and everything. But in a large part of the world, the economy was humming along. Everything was good. There was hope for the future. And now, in 2 months, it's just completely upside down. And I think this is the question I ask sometimes when I teach is, I know this is difficult to deal with, but what did you think that living in the end times was really going to look like?
Yeah, but that's a very good point. For a lot of people in the church, mainstream church particularly, they weren't even looking at anything to do with the end times. It was all, God wants you prosperous and wealthy and healthy and happy and all of that. And they didn't have any planning for something like this at all. Some of us, like you and I, have been expecting something along these lines, but I think it's caught all of us by surprise, the timing and the rapidity that it's all happened.
What a lot of times people would look at you and me as sort of a Pollyanna type figure or a Jeremiah. You're just depressing me. Your prophecy update is kind of dark and gloomy, and I'm like, imagine what it would be like if my life really wasn't too bad. I mean, as I told you, I'm spending time with more time with my wife, a great woman. And so things for us are not that bad, but I'm just telling you, Tony, I look around, I talk to people at the office, I see what's going on with banks and loans and that type of thing. And it's just, it's a storm like I've never seen before. It's, here's another article from the Wall Street Journal today. What happens when the credit union, nobody's paying the loans to the credit union, repaying the loans to the credit union? Credit unions are here in the United States are sort of like banks for specific industries. They do banking, they do auto loans, home loans, and mortgages. And what happens when a certain industry tied to a credit union goes, nobody has a job, nobody's repaying their mortgage or loans that are owed to the credit union. The credit unions are going to go out of business. I just think it's the most complex set of circumstances I've ever seen. I wouldn't want to be in charge trying to make decisions.
No,
there are people in charge, though, who are making decisions to further agendas that we really don't want to happen. But I do think they will. I think they're prophesied that they will happen. And I guess, we just have to kind of deal with it. This is the world that we're going to be living in. I just don't think it's going back to any semblance of what it was like 2 months ago.
No, I agree. It's not going to go back to that, and it's going to be tough, and people should prepare themselves spiritually. Do what you can to prepare physically as well, and particularly with food shortages coming, and which is another thing we won't get into today because we've sort of run out of time, but it's going to be tough.
Can I give you one final thought?
Yeah.
A friend of mine, we were talking today, and I had used the example a couple times recently of Daniel. When Daniel knew that he was near a period of time when Bible prophecy was going to be fulfilled. And Daniel prayed. Daniel prayed and repented on behalf of himself and the nation of Israel. And I think if you read through the book of Joel, that type of thing, there's a lot of admonitions for prayer and fasting. And I think that might be a thing that we really need to think about doing seriously, that I think it's the time for the people of God to unite around that. And maybe we need to tamp back some of our arguments about exactly how this is all going to play out and pray and repent before the Lord for the things that have been done that are against God's plan. Look, there's plenty of blame to go around, and judgment begins in the house of God. I think repentance and recovery begins in the house of God as well.
That's a good point. Just tell the listeners where they can find you online, John, before we go.
Yeah, our church website is fbchapel.com. You'll see links there to our various live stream platforms. We do live stream our services and My Prophecy Update on Facebook, on a live stream video, and on YouTube. We don't know how long that will go on, but you can also find us on YouTube at Fellowship Bible Chapel, or just Google my name or search my name on YouTube and everything should come up.
Thanks, John. And don't forget too, folks, aminutetomidnight.com. Visit our website and bookmark it, and also our YouTube channel and iTunes channel. We put all our shows on both of those in audio and video format. A Minute to Midnight's run 100% by donations as well, and we really appreciate when people do help us out. Can't do it without your help, so thanks to the folks that do. The music used in the shows I've written, played and recorded, and you can download free music on the website as well. And it's about time I actually started making some more music because I've been so focused on everything else. I haven't done much for a while. But yeah, so that's about it, I think, folks. I want to say a big thank you, John, for being on the show again.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have to do it again soon. There'll be plenty to talk about in the days ahead. So yeah, that's it, folks, for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll hopefully be back with another show in a few days' time. Until then, God bless and stay safe.